This week we hear Jesus pray his desire that they may all be one. Beautiful words. But if you keep reading the New Testament, the church seems to fall apart almost immediately. Complaints, divisions, factions, scandals, and power struggles erupt everywhere. So what happened? We'll explore the curious case of the missing L, how we becomes me, and why the love revealed on the cross is still the only thing that can keep us from becoming alone. The gospel today ends with the warmest of sentiments in the prayer of Jesus for us. Holy Father, protect them in your name that you've given me, so that they may be one as we are one. Nice. Then we hear the lesson from Acts after Jesus has ascended to heaven. They went to the room upstairs where they were staying. Peter and John and James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas, the son of James. All these were constantly devoting themselves to prayer, together with certain women, including Mary, the mother of Jesus, as well as his brothers. You can almost see them all holding hands and singing Kumbaya. That's how it's supposed to be. It's what Jesus prayed for, and it was going so well, and they were getting it right. It seems like for about 10 minutes. Because if you keep reading Acts and the epistles, the writers of the New Testament don't hold back on the failures of the church. First out of the gate, somebody lies. In Acts 5, 1 through 11, Ananias and Sapphira pretend to donate all the proceeds from a sale while secretly keeping some for themselves. They want the appearance of sacrificial love without the reality of it. Then in chapter 6, either some mistreatment happens or there's some groundless complaining. The Hellenist widows complain that they are being neglected in the daily distribution while the Hebrew widows are being cared for. That's the very first internal church conflict, and it's based basically over food service logistic at fellowship meals. And then the ethnic tensions go deeper. Jews and Gentiles argue over circumcision, food laws, purity, and belonging. Acts 15 records the council at Jerusalem because the conflict has become so serious that the church is in danger of splitting apart. They all continue jockeying over power. And right before Jesus departs, they are still asking, Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel? They're still thinking in terms of position and possession and authority and power. Later, 3 John 9 warns about Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, it says. The doctrinal arguments erupt everywhere. Galatians fights over grace. The Galatians fight over grace and law. Romans wrestle with Jew and Gentile identity. Corinth fights about resurrection, spiritual gifts, worship, and morality. Paul writes Galatians fuming, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting. The people split into factions. In 1 Corinthians 1, the 12th chapter, or the 12th verse, believers divide themselves into camps. I belong to Paul. I belong to Apollos. I belong to Cephas. The church starts turning spiritual leaders into rival brands and personality cults. And then the tattling begins. Over and over, Paul writes things like, it's been reported to me, which means somebody in Corinth or one of the other cities is writing letters saying, Paul, you are not going to believe what these people are doing now. There are lawsuits among believers in 1 Corinthians 6, sexual scandals, 1 Corinthians 5, chaos in worship, 1 Corinthians 14, and finally, even communion itself gets messed up. Paul says, when you come together, it is not really to eat the Lord's Supper, for when the time comes to eat, each of you goes ahead with your own supper, and one often goes hungry and another becomes drunk. It's not really the Lord's Supper. Wow. They are saying the words, breaking the bread, and drinking the cup, but all the love is gone. The unity is broken. The wealthy eat while the poor are humbled. Even at the table of grace, they have curved inward unto themselves. And yet, Jesus prayed that they all may be one. We call it communion because it's supposed to be participation in Jesus, in one another, in grace, and in a shared life. It's not private spirituality happening side by side in a room. As Lutherans, we call it a sacrament because something real is happening there, not just a memory, not just some symbolism. Christ giving himself to and for a fractured people. That's where the grace is. While we were still sinners, Jesus dared to die for us. So the challenge is to knock off all the bad separatist behaviors and to seek the oneness that Jesus prayed so desperately for us to have. We shouldn't come to the table proclaiming one body while carrying divisions and resentments, exclusions and pride and self-protection, all the ideological camps and all the old wounds and scars. We've talked about it, St. Augustine before, and his Latin definition of sin that Martin Luther later carried forward. That sin is when we curve back inward into ourselves. In Latin, incurvatus in se. We were created for being we. We were created for communion, community, relationship, shared burdens, shared joys, shared life together in God. From the very beginning, God said, it's not good for humans to be alone. Jesus tells us he wants us to be all one. But sin inverts we into me. We curve inward. My position, my rights, my group, my theology, my preferences, my wounds, my fears, my salvation. When that happens, it creates the curious case of the missing L. Remove the L from all one, and all that remains is alone. What God did not create us to be. Jesus prays that they all may be one, all one. But without love, the big L, we collapses into just me. And the W gets flipped. The love for one another disappears, and all one collapses into just alone. And that is exactly what keeps happening throughout the New Testament. We see the church curve inward, the community fractures, the table divides, the people separate into camps. Yet Jesus keeps praying for them and us anyway. That's the amazing thing. Jesus knows exactly who he's praying for. He knows Peter's going to fail. He knows the disciples will fracture. He knows churches will fight. He knows people will wound each other, even at the communion table. And still he prays that we follow the commandment to love one another so that we can be we and may be all one. We won't achieve it because unity's easy. We won't achieve it because love comes naturally. We can achieve it because Jesus is praying for us. And he wants us to see that the way that the world is able to see him is through us. Jesus has ascended. The world no longer sees him walking the roads around Galilee. Now the world sees Jesus through us, through whether we love, through whether we forgive, through whether or not we bear one another's burdens, through whether we love our neighbor as ourselves, through whether we love our enemies, through whether we seek justice, and through whether we offer the cool cup of water, through whether we remain a we. That's why the cross matters so much. Because in John's gospel, glory is not trophies or applause or worldly power. The glory of God is revealed when Jesus gives himself away in love, and now when we do the same. That's what Jesus meant when he asked us to take up our cross and follow him. That's the big L, the love that refuses to let us remain alone. Amen.